2015, Ulushalala Mzansi led a cause. This was a cause that was so powerful, Uguti, it emerged in different parts of the country. This is when Ulushalala Mzansi thought we've had enough and took to the streets to say enough is enough to the forever rising price of tertiary education. So when we look at that and we fast forward to 2019, we look at some young people who are now living with the consequences of having led such a cause. One of those young people is Khanya Cekeshe. We speak to him namhlanje. I have so many questions for him. Let's go meet him.
FeesMustFall activist Khanya Cekeshe was sentenced to 3 years house arrest and he must undergo life skills courses. He was also ordered to pay a 5,000 rand fine or serve a 3-year prison sentence, suspended for 5 years.
I'm at home for the next 3 years because my house arrest finishes at 2022. So I'm at home, I'm not allowed to leave home. If I leave home, I must do application. They must either approve it or disapprove it. When I go to school, I must first submit my timetable to them. I'm writing on this day, so am I allowed to go to school? I'm signing, I'm subjected to all these things of programs under government. I still, when I'm looking for a job, I still have to go and explain why should we employ you, because when now you have a criminal record, the government has declared you as a person who is a danger to society. Why should we employ you?
You know, you're speaking about having to explain yourself to potential employers all the time. How does this make you feel?
Bitter, I'm very bitter. I'm bitter. When they were campaigning for elections, they were saying we've given free education to young people. But those who are in the forefront of it, they are persecuted, they are dealt with, they are isolated. They are eating the most best years of my life. When I'm youth, when I'm supposed to be most active, I'm stuck at home, I can't move.
What would you like to say to your government?
Free Khanya Cekeshe, release him from where we are, from where he is, set him free. 2 years has been too long. Let's hope that when he goes out, he can still reintegrate with the entire community. Also intervene on our issues, set us free, expunge our criminal record, expunge all of them, give us a general amnesty, set free all FeesMustFall activists. We want to continue with our lives.
And on that note, we want to say hello, Dumelang Sanbonani, South Africa. A very warm welcome to Expressions. This is definitely the place for you to air your views. I'm your host, Jacqueline Mapala.
And I'm your host, Umxolisi Wagamasango. Now, we are coming to you live from our headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Now, should FeesMustFall activists be granted presidential pardon? Now, do join us as we spotlight this very important issue, Jackie.
Yes, Mko, this is indeed a very important issue because for some of the student activists, free education has come at a very heavy price. Now, the FeesMustFall protest that took place between both 2015 and 2016 saw a number of students being expelled from universities and some getting arrested. Now, Khanya Cekeshe, the one FeesMustFall activist who is still behind bars, was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for public violence and malicious damage to property. Now, other students have been sentenced, and some of them have been under house arrest, and others are still making court appearances.
Jackie, we took to the streets as Expressions just to find out whether FeesMustFall activists should be granted presidential pardon. And now this is what they had to say on the streets. Take a look at this.
I do think they do deserve a second chance in life, and they do deserve a presidential pardon because they were fighting for a genuine cause, which was a free education in South Africa, of which it was promised to us by the ANC government.
Bonke nabafundi abebenga afford ukuthi bakwazi ukubaya esikoleni sebeyakwazi ukuthi beye esikoleni manje.
Into ayikhombisile laphana ukuthi kufanele kuphumelele ingane umuntu omnyama. Since sithi sine freedom, i-freedom ayize ngazo zonke indlela, yabo, and the background the freedom education.
The cause that they were fighting for is a genuine cause. Like, they didn't commit any crime in South Africa. Nanoguti, at last, the government he is offering free education.
I'm not sure they deserve a second chance. These guys, they fought well, because some of us as a student, we are so struggling in many ways.
Every student in South Africa will benefit for the struggle that they were pushing by that time.
laba kade beyilwela-ke bona-ke ababakhulule bengacindezelwa besejele kube ukuthi abantu bona badla ama-fruits akhe then laba abalwa bona bavalelwe.
Some interesting comments there coming from young people on the streets. But to help me unpack this very important issue and to take this discussion further, I'm joined in my studio right now by Rodney Isaacs, who is from the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, and he is the Chief Litigation Officer. And at our C Point studio, we want to again welcome Naledi Chirwa, who is from at least a FeesMustFall activist, as well as a member of Parliament. Naledi and Rodney, welcome to Expressions.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, and good evening to the viewers.
It's good to have you tonight in studio with us. And of course, I never do this by myself. They always say the best things come in twos. And my co-host Mxolisi is, of course, going to be manning our social media corner and bringing some of your insights and comments on this also important conversation that we're having tonight in studio. Rodney, I think maybe let me start with you. At least we heard some of the comments that were shared on the insert. And I want to also just put a particular spotlight on what Minister Ronald Lamola had stated around the fact that there will be no blanket amnesty. I mean, for a cause such as FeesMustFall, why is the law treating activists and essentially freedom fighters in the way that, you know, young people are being treated right now? Why are they not given a presidential pardon?
Well, it's not that they're not being given a presidential pardon. Presidential pardons work in accordance with an application. There's a set of criteria that you have to comply with. The presidential pardon gets processed in the Department of Justice, but it is the President's final decision. So in accordance with the Constitution, Section 84 of the Constitution, the decision is with the President. We process the application and we give the best possible set of documents to the President, and he makes the decision.
So again, the question is, why has the President not made this particular decision? Because, I mean, especially when we are talking about, you know, young people such as Cekeshe, for instance, and we're speaking about Khanya. I mean, their situation it's not something that is recent. Why haven't we changed the situation?
No, an application needs to be submitted. And as you know, Mr. Cekeshe is in a judicial process.
Yeah, but Rodney, again, but I want to go to Naledi because these are not criminals per se. Naledi, I just want to check you can hear me loud and clear?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. I mean, Naledi, I mean, you can, I'm sure, understand just maybe a little bit of the frustration that I think you maybe heard as well on the insert around the fact that, you know, nothing still at this point in time has been done. And I just want to find out from you, I mean, you were part and parcel of that very movement. And I mean, as a young person who is actually in Parliament right now because of that very movement, but equally so, we are seeing your counterparts being imprisoned because of that movement. We want to find out, ever since you've been in Parliament, what have you and your other counterparts who are in Parliament done to change the situation?
I mean, first and foremost, we mentioned the name of Khanya Cekeshe and other FeesMustFall activists who were casualties in the motions, in our statements, in our speeches, right? But there's still pushback from the ruling party in the sense that I hear what the guy is saying there about the fact that there has to be applications. But he's completely erasing the fact that there was a march last year led by Khanya calling for pardoning of FeesMustFall activists. And secondly, there's been constant calls. It's not like the department does not know that there's people who are arrested, people who are expelled from school, people who are suspended from the schools, right from universities. There is just no political will on the side of the department to ensure that this happens. This is because that the department, in fact, the ANC government, expediates itself on the struggles of black people. It's not something that is foreign to them. The fact that FeesMustFall must be treated, or rather, the cases of FeesMustFall activists must be treated like common criminals. In fact, even with the process of applications for parole, is actually very disingenuous for the government that claims to have given us free education, that claims to be on the side of those who are fighting free. In fact, if anything, the state is the side that acted like terrorists during FeesMustFall. Even the Senate report confirms this, to that that the state response to FeesMustFall activists was in fact against the law because there was too much violence that was inflicted on FeesMustFall activists. Are there any police who are arrested? No. Is there anyone official who's facing the music of the law? No, because it is not about criminality. It is about arresting the idea of decoloniality, of free education in our lifetime.
Now, let me interject a little bit here because, you know, it's a different case altogether when you are speaking from the stance of being an activist. Now, I'm asking you this question specifically because now you're a member of parliament. And as young people, they're probably listening to you right now to say, look, are you not passing the buck? Because you should have, to some level of authority, some level of influence. I mean, maybe even the question...
That is what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying. I said it in the beginning of my answer. That me, together with my colleagues Peter Ketsi and Vuyani Pambo, have asked the House to debate the release of Khanya Cekeshe. We've set up motions, we've set up statements, we've set declarations in favor of Khanya Cekeshe's release, right? But if the House does not agree to a motion to be discussed and debated in Parliament, then it does not happen. Because at the end of the day, we are not the ruling party. The EFF is not the ruling party. We are working with a 10% here, right? In fact, you go to the court cases of Khanya Cekeshe, ask yourself and see who's there. It is the EFF. Right? But we are not the ruling party. In fact, it is very disingenuous, once again, to put the blame on people who were also victims of the same state that brutalized and terrorized us. I was also arrested. Vuyani Pambo was also being hunted down by the police. Peter Ketsi is also expelled and suspended from the University of Johannesburg. So it is not us who took Khanya Cekeshe and put him in jail. And it's not us who can take him out. It is the government of today. And they are not doing that. That is what the bone of contention should be in this conversation, in fact.
All right, so I'm going to have to interject there a little bit, but I think Naledi has definitely expressed, I think, her sentiments very clearly. And Rodney, we'll come back to you because I think there's a lot that needs to be addressed from some of the comments that she shared. And I think for you, I don't know, do you honestly feel that as young people, we are powerless to do something about this particular issue? I mean, let us know. We've got our social media, of course, that you can interact with us on, and let us know, like, what you think about this particular issue. You are watching Expressions. We'll be back right after this.
You're still watching Expressions. This is your #1 youth current affairs show. Now, should FeesMustFall activists be granted presidential pardon? That's the big question. I'm Khanya Cekeshe. I'm now joined by Almighty Jamie, who's a political analyst. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on the show. Now, Jamie, when we talk about presidential pardon, it's this question that immediately comes to mind. When we talk about presidential pardon, there's this perception that it might also undermine justice. What is your take? Do you think it undermines justice? And where do you stand as far as presidential pardon is concerned?
So in his letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King has this often quoted citation where he says, an unjust law is no law at all. So we've got to start there and say, at a principle level, is it justifiable for someone who says, listen, I've studied all my life, I've gotten to this level, and the corridors of learning which are promised in the Freedom Charter have been shut down. They protest in the spirit of 76, and you get cast in chains and thrown into jail, right? So we've got to look at it at that level and say at a principle level, something's wrong with what has happened in this particular context, especially if we're looking at Khanya Cekeshe. Now, coming to the presidential pardon, it's one element which we need to consider, but there's also the National Prosecuting Authority. They've taken a very hard line in dealing with this young man. In the first instance, there were 2 people who were charged, but only 1 person was taken to court. So questions need to be asked about that. In the second instance, the admission of guilt seems to have been a coerced admission of guilt, which is what was being argued by Advocate Ngogaitobi, that, listen, there seems to be a duplication here because his confession was an exact replica of what the charge sheet says. Now, if the charge sheet says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you say, I therefore confess to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, every reasonable person has to ask themselves, why does your confession sound exactly the same as the charge sheet? Because when you are giving your confession, if it's coming freely from you, it won't necessarily sound like the charge sheet because you're going to say it in your own language. So the fact that there was a discrepancy was a red flag. Another red flag is that the state did not actually adduce any evidence, which means they didn't attach any evidence to prove his guilt. They merely relied on this confession, which was problematic, which is why in the context of looking at the legal arguments which were presented in court, it was clear that something needs to be re-examined in this particular case. One, why has he been singled out? 2, where are the other people who were alleged to have co-conspired with him to commit the crime? 3, why does his confession sound like a replica of what was on the charge sheet? And 4, why have you not produced any evidence, right? So when you look at it in that context, the NPA then takes an adversarial position to this young man. They oppose bail, they delay in the delivery of papers, they delay and they dither to keep this young man in jail. In December, he'll have been in jail for 2 years.
All right, I think perhaps this is also the part where we can bring Rodney in. He's making reference to the Khanya Cekeshe case. And I mean, of course, I remember the department at some point saying that they need to oversee and make sure that the process of the appeal is through with before they can take action, because they want to avoid a so-called parallel process taking place. What happens in the meantime? That's what young people want to know on social media. Do we leave these young people languishing in prison with hardened criminals?
No, I maybe just need to say that the cause was a good cause. It benefited millions of students. Maybe just need to make that point. No, there are processes. It's just how society is structured. There are processes. He's now in his appeal process. So we have to respect the judicial process. Once the judicial process is gone and his appeal process is successful, hopefully he will be released. Once the appeal process is exhausted, he then comes back to the department and he says, I am now going to exhaust my further remedies, which is then the pardon. So it's not the end. I am unfortunately not able to speak on behalf of the prosecution.
All right.
And the police who would have opposed the bail.
All right.
So that's where we are now.
Okay, so we leave them there in the meantime.
Please.
That's what you're saying, Rodney?
Yes. No.
All right.
I'm saying I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the police and the prosecution.
All right.
But keeping in mind what the gentleman over there said, and keeping in mind the point that you are presenting, I would like to think that one would hope that we could allow students to continue with their studies.
All right, sure. Okay, now that we've heard that, Mbugele Lapeka, now let's just quickly check in with your WhatsApp expression for this week. Please roll it.
Hi guys, thank you very much for Inkobo Mnandi. Personally, I do think that the student activists, they deserved the presidential pardon. Why? Because they did what they did, because they were trying to help young South Africans who wants to go to school but who does not have the financial backing. I mean, they did not kill anyone, people. Let's give them a chance.
I'm also eagerly awaiting Naledi's response in Cape Town after the break. I'm looking forward to that. But now, Jamie, I just want to know, there's also this perception that this whole thing has now pitted these young people who are fighting this cause hand in hand together against one another, because the sense on the ground is that, look, there's some people in Parliament now, they've totally forgotten about us. Do you think that, in a way, what's your take? Do you think this was meant to pit these young people against each other?
So look, I think it's unfortunate that some people got rewards for their activism while some people got punished. It's obviously an example of injustice to say, here are some MPs, now they can make 90,000 and you go to jail for 2 years and good luck with your case, right? So obviously we as civil society have to be asking these tough questions, but I think it may be a little bit unfair on the MPs, although I haven't heard a very strong voice from the ANC side, because you must remember that there were activists from both the ANC and the EFF. I think the EFF has been on point in making the calls. I think we need to challenge the ANC MPs who were also youth activists on FeesMustFall to raise their voices in solidarity.
All right.
It can't be a one-party issue. It has to be a collective issue.
All right, Jamie Oliver is a political, Jamie Mighty is a political.
I also cook. I do also cook.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to know that Jamie that we normally have on the show. So Mbugeli, just make sure that you do keep your comments coming on all our social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. We continue with this important discussion. Masbuya, remember to tell a friend that the hottest current affairs show is now showing. Back after this.
Welcome back. You are still watching Expressions here on SABC1. We're talking about FeesMustFall, but I think most importantly in terms of our poll question that we're asking you, Khanya, is should FeesMustFall activists be granted presidential pardon? That's the question that we're asking you tonight. And of course, I just want to cross over, I think, to Naledi now as we wrap up this conversation. And I think, Naledi, maybe just the question I want to direct to you. I mean, we heard a lot of different comments and Kolisi speaking to our guests around, you know, the merits of the case and the issues around this particular issue. I just want to find out, I mean, if the same power and force of the youth that was able to move a whole entire country, you know, through FeesMustFall, can that same force and movement be able to move the state and our legal system to free these young people?
I mean, absolutely. I think as FeesMustFall as a movement, the first time we dropped the ball was when we decided to go back to classes when people were suspended, others were expelled, and others were arrested. That's when we first dropped the ball. But moving on from here onwards, I think it's very much possible for young people, for those in universities and tertiaries, and for civil society to unite in the calling of Khanya Cekeshe to be released from jail. And secondly, this is a call for the whole transformation system of our legal system, which criminalizes black people, and especially black men, to be specific, which coerces them to admit guilt of crimes they have not committed, or crimes that are not really crimes but actually come from poverty, and wanting the status quo to change. So I think the call for Khanya Cekeshe to be released from jail is something that should be on all our lips. It shouldn't be the effort of one group over the other, right? It should be the civil society that's taking part of this. It should be our parents. It should be all political formations. We should be working towards ensuring that the justice that was taken away from Khanya Cekeshe, the fact that people are still have to call for his release, is a tragedy of justice really in South Africa, and we are sitting on this, and the department as well. There's no time for excuses anymore. The president, what you promised to Maria last year at the gender-based violence summit, and what you promised to Khanya Cekeshe must start manifesting. We need to see the state do what it's capable of doing. If you can spend millions spying on FeesMustFall activists, then surely you can spend millions in ensuring that Khanya Cekeshe is released from jail.
Well, thank you very much. And listen, Naledi definitely gave us food for thought, and Ronnie, I'm just going to give you just the opportunity to just close everything off. What is the way forward?
Well, Jacqueline, a few months ago, or early in the year, it could have been early in the year, like last year, there was a delegation between the Department of Justice and representatives of the FeesMustFall, those that were actually charged and facing charges, investigations, where we had agreed that they would consolidate the sets of names and information, supply us with the details, and we will then assist them in mass. And not just subject them each to their own individual expenses of applications, etc. That offer is still seriously on the table. We are still prepared to sit and deal with it en masse. It's not seen as a blanket, because it will still be dealt with individually, but we can and surely can attend to prioritize. We surely can attend to give not special treatment, but you know there's a difference between. But we definitely can. Our doors are open.
Well, I mean, your doors have been open for the last 2 years and so. That's how long he's been in jail for. So hopefully we'll be able to come to some kind of resolution.
Well, Jackie, the big question of Khanya Cekeshe, which is, should FeesMustFall activists be granted presidential pardon? Can we please get the poll results up in the meantime? This is what you had to say there at home. About 80% of you said yes, and just about 20% said no. So clearly something needs to be done there.
Definitely. I think we can unite our voices to do something about that indeed.
Absolutely. Now, Mbugeli, before we wrap up the show, we have some great news to share with you, Lafikhaya. Now, our very own producer, has won the Vodacom Journalist of the Year Regional Award in the category for politics. Now, this is most certainly a prestigious award and a great acknowledgement of the Expressions show, as well as the great work that our team puts in every week. Let's just quickly take a look at this.
The award, the category politics, go to the SABC's Mziyandi Mbedla for the Expressions program, and the show was done in Dalhara.
Boss, join me. My boss is already on set, and everybody, part of the family, is part of the team is here now. But Timzi, I guess, Kulume, what motivated you to take us to EDA? Because I remember the young, passionate people who wanted change in their communities. What inspired Expressions going to EDA?
There is so much that is happening in the outskirts. Like the Northern Cape is a very neglected area. So there are issues that are arising each on a daily basis.
All right.
There's such as drug abuse, teenage pregnancy, all those kind of things.
And I'm sure we'll be doing more of these again. Thank you so much. Well done, well done. I'm looking forward to more of these. Thank you so much for joining us. Sometimes shows off on a celebratory note. Thank you so much for joining us. From all of us, like Kaya, we wish you a spectacular evening going forward in Senegal.
Thank you for making us look